It's Cookies for Breakfast with me, Danny Lebrecq. Welcome. I'm excited. Today we've got Craig Shemin. He's the author of the new book, Salmon Friends, the story of Jim Henson's first television show. Those roots go all the way back here to Maryland, and we're awfully proud. Before we get there, though, I wanted to share the reason why we call it Cookies for Breakfast. It's a bit of an analogy for me. I think there's a lot of, quote, junk food being offered to kids nowadays through our screens. A lot is coming down the pipeline. And, we want to strive for the best. We want to inspire our fellow creators. And I think that's what's going to happen in this episode. We're going to learn about a young couple just starting off in Maryland and their dream and how far they could take that dream. It's going to be a great conversation. Hope you enjoy it. Hey everyone, welcome back to Cookies for Breakfast. This is a good one. We've got another good one. I started this series speaking to peers in children's media. My wife Stephanie and I find ourselves in a very interesting place right now. We moved to Baltimore because she got an opportunity to go from nonprofit to for-profit in interactive screen technology and online learning for universities. The big company that she was with did a massive layoff, something that's happening to many people in the world right now. And we had some decisions to make about what we were going to do next. How were we going to pivot? Around the same time with Danny Joe's Treehouse, my little local kids show, starting to get my foot in the door at some larger players, really exciting stuff. And Stephanie and our kids who are 10 and 12 sat down at the kitchen table and said, what do we want to do? Do we want to have regrets? Is this the moment that we try to move forward and see what we can do as a family, like make something together and see how many people we can serve? Or do we walk away and have a question? And we debated it and we decided, no, we're going to go for it. We're going for it. And we're in this wonderful place where we are equal parts terrified and never have we been happier just being with each other every day and making really quality content. We feel quality content, beyond content, and offering for kids, really listening to them and serving them and making something that we feel proud of. And hopefully we can keep that going. We're in that place right now that's scary. We're not sure what could happen. And we look to patterns in history and we look back to predecessors. And someone that I've been thinking about a lot is Jim Henson, Jim and Jane Henson. In Maryland at the time of Salmon Friends, before the Muppets and Sesame Street and so many other amazing historical programs that have such a deep relationship with so many individuals. It started as something pretty small and it grew out of joy and love, I think. I don't know all of the history, but my guest has a better idea. Craig Shemin. Hi, welcome to Cookies for Breakfast.
It's Shemin, but it's okay.
Shemin, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Forgive me.
That's quite all right. I've been called much worse.
Yeah, me too. And I will not edit that out because I think it's important to own up to one's mistakes and try again.
That's perfectly fine. It's great to be here.
I heard your interview on Under the Puppet, and it was just fascinating. You've got such a long history in children's media, and I was thinking about where to start. And I thought maybe we could start with what was a moment for you where you thought, you know what, I'm making this choice. This is not only is this something I care about, but what was the moment that made you go, no, this is it. This is where I want to go as an adult. Was there a moment that you can think of?
It's interesting. It's an interesting question because the moment I can identify is when I decided to, just try and get an internship at the Henson Company. I was at Northwestern and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do over the summer. It was winter, and I happened to watch a documentary called Henson's Place, and it was a documentary that was on PBS about Jim Henson, and I had always been a Henson fan. I was one of those kids who would go to the library and look up the microfilm about the Muppets because you couldn't do anything else. When I was growing up, it was when the Muppet Show was first on, and there was not VHS or any way to record a show. And I remember, when the VHS tape first came out and we rented the Muppet movie, and I would write down dialogue on index cards because that I couldn't copy it any other way. And seeing that documentary made me think he does this for a living. And it looks like, from all of the footage I've seen, all of the Muppet stuff that I grew up with, and this was in the mid 80s, I'm started to think, boy, if he could do this, I could possibly get a job working for this person. I called up Henson Associates, it was then called, and I got an appointment to go see them during my spring break. And I had an interview with nice people, and they brought me on as an intern that summer working in the public relations department. And during that summer, I got to meet Jim Henson. And I started to see this group of people that he put together. And even though this was after the Muppet Show, and they always tell you that the golden age of every place is always 6 months before you get there. And there was a little of that going on, but it was still really cool. And it was starting to work there. And I started thinking, boy, this could be something I'd want to do. And I started getting to know some of those people. Jerry Jewell, who was the Muppets head writer. And for a while, I didn't know if I wanted to be a puppeteer because I had done some puppets in college, and I didn't know if and then just sort of gravitated towards writing because I don't feel the same passion for performing as I did for just coming up with material. And once I was at Henson, I just started doing more material, and I took on some freelance jobs outside of Henson to sort of try and make me a better writer, and that started getting me, or at least semi good at what I wanted to do.
What is that? What does that mean for like the side? What kind of side jobs? Outside of children's media at the time,
Well, no, it was in children's media. Just yeah, I got a job doing a show for Sid and Marty Krofft.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, they were doing. It was called Toby Terrier.
Toby Terrier.
Toby Terrier and his video pals, and it was a toy. The concept was that this was a stuffed dog that had a little lens in his collar, and you would point the toy at the TV set, and the toy would talk when a certain signal came out of the TV. They implanted these little signals in the what they called the vertical blanking range of the TV signal. This was back in old standard definition televisions.
What year about is this? Is this in the 90s or?
Yeah, this would have been about like 91, 92.
You know what it makes me think of? I bet you, I'm sure you know, Winky Dink and You
Yeah, yeah,
from that crossover of, like, we talk about interactive screens all the time now, but it's not really new.
yeah.
I mean, that sort of crossover has been going on for a long time.
But it was a challenge because because of the nature of the toy company, they had to come up with what Toby was saying many, many months before they ever hired me.
So you had to write to what was already put in place. So it kind of limited.
So yeah, so Toby could say about 20 things, 15 or 20 things. They gave me a list, and you had to try and work those things into the dialogue, even if it didn't really fit, because they didn't really, they didn't really think about storytelling when they were coming up with this list of things. They just said, oh, what are cute things for a dog to say?
Right.
And, then they say, okay, he has to say this stuff. So we would put that into the scripts, and the characters on the screen would, look to the camera and ask a question, and the dog would bark or reply or say something. And they would leave little spaces for that to happen when they shot the show. And that was fine. So if you had a Toby and you had, it was a home video, it was a VHS cassette. And if you had the Toby and the cassette, it was great. But then in order to try and recoup some of the money they've spent developing this stuff, they also sold the show into syndication, even though they only had like 11 episodes. So they would show it on TV where kids at home did not necessarily have the Toby toy. And there would be these big gaps where no one would say anything because they left them for the toy to respond.
And I would imagine it wasn't always like the Blues Clues scenario of asking an open-ended question and pausing. Sometimes it would just be random.
Yeah, because the questions were not always asked. Sometimes it was just Toby saying something, being included in a conversation. And I'm thinking, well, this is kind of weird, but they're showing it at 5:30 in the morning, on the station. Nobody's going to see it. So I come into Henson like after a weekend that it's on for like 1 or 2 weeks. And the first person I see is Jane Henson, Jim's wife. And first thing she says, Craig, did I see your name on this dog show over the weekend? Where, you know, uh, yeah, I did that. And she said, this cute puppets, but for some reason, just things would stop and no one would say anything. And I had to explain to her, well, you see, there's this toy. So it was weird, but it was stuff like that, opportunities that I sought outside of Henson that helped me get higher within the company.
It seems like there are all these pieces to the puzzle. I think about the people on the other side listening to this who are in a place of I don't know what I'm not finding the place. I'm speaking to myself too. Like, but there's always a piece of the puzzle somewhere. You might not necessarily see how it's going to serve you ultimately, but it does. It all feeds into the same path one way or another. I wanted to speak a little bit to that relationship between the creative, the writer, the producer, the people thinking about merchandise and how do we make the biggest bang from the buck and interactive elements. There's a neat story. Neat is an objective word, I guess. I'm not sure how I feel about it. Not super great right now, but there's a production company called Genius Brands, and they are leaning in hard to AI generated series where it's chat GBT, not only doing the script, but animation, voices, all of the stuff, and a little bit of human review. Um, but the thing that they're super excited about right now is we're going to save costs. We can generate more stuff, and it's shorter periods um, of cookies for breakfast. It's something that's made for a YouTube sort of presentation and speaking to the algorithm. And I'm often divided on that. Like I understand the importance of building an audience. And of course you have to make money to make more stuff. But when it comes to intention, um, of what are you serving the kids and why are you serving it to them and what's the moral responsibility there? um, I know it's not a new thing, finding that balance. Um, but did you see patterns like that where you kind of questioned from time to time? Well, what am I? What is the impact here? Making something fun is fun for the sake of fun. That's fine. But also, are we? Is it just making money? Like, what's the balance? It's kind of an open-ended question, but
Well, it's a very interesting area. It's tough because I have worked on shows that have been produced by toy companies.
mhm.
I just talked about one. I've worked on others where they actually tell you, well, we have this toy coming out in the third quarter if you can work in, so the character, uses that gadget or something like that. And, on one hand, it's not like that character would not use that gadget because it was designed for that character. But, they got to keep the lights on. They got to pay for the stuff and it has to come somewhere. And the problem is, and this is across the entire industry, not just with children's and family entertainment, there was such a glut of production. It's not like we had 20 times as many kids pop up to watch it, but it seems like there's 20 times as much content as there was, 5 years ago. And it's tough to sort of get any sort of toehold on an audience when there's so much constantly being produced. I think that the AI issue to me is pretty ridiculous because AI could be cool for information, but it really is not good at telling a joke. And if it does tell a joke, it's telling a joke that's been told to it. It will make it seem like a joke, but it will not have the concept behind it. it was demonstrated recently. Alan Alda, who hosts a podcast about science, had AI write a scene between him and BJ Honeycutt from MASH, and they had him and Mike Farrell read the scene on Alan Alda's podcast, and it just didn't sound real. They sort of what all AI can do is basically toss a word salad.
Right. Prediction model stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's taking any information that it's been given and it's soaking up all this information, but it can't do anything really creative in terms of trying to figure out how to tell a story or convey information in a fun way. So it gets down to, it's a matter of cost, as you said.
Hmm.
What they're going to do is rely on AI to create drafts of something. And then they're going to have some overworked story editors try and come up with, a workable draft from that material. And the thing is, that's not where you should be saving your money in your workflow. You should be spending money on the idea, on the execution of your scripts and your stories. Maybe if the executives, have one less executive, in the production company. Now, executives are great, but there are so many layers of bureaucracy, and they end up basically being people who tell you not to do something.
I've certainly been in those writer rooms where you're so passionate and you've got this great new idea and it comes from a personal experience and you're working with other writers and they're sharing their childhood experiences or an adult experience, but it's coming from the invisible inside stuff, whatever name you want to put on it. And then the editing process of, yeah, but how do we make that a 360 character? How do we turn that into a plushy totem that we can sell so the kids feel more connected, which is good, but also how are we going to make money off of that? And you know what is actually really popular? Dogs on vehicles. Can we do another spin-off of a dog on a like
Well, because you can sell the vehicles, you can sell the toy, the dog, you can sell the vehicle. My observation has been that efforts to use technology to save money end up costing more money in the long run.
that? And that's going, your observations going back to.
It's going back to just my observations of working on projects where technology was deployed in the concept of doing things faster and easier. One of my favorite projects I worked on was called Wubulous World of Dr. Seuss. And we used this then cutting edge technology of using, we had a virtual set on a blue screen, and the set was created in computers. Now, this was really a good 10 to 15 years before the computers were available that could actually do this reliably and well. So our computer system hiccuped a lot and had to be restarted and rebooted. And we actually shut down production for a few weeks early on just because a new computer had come out. Let's bring in the new system. Now the show I think came out really nice, but it was not the time saving, money saving production. Oh, well, we don't have to build a set, so we can just pop it up there. Nowadays, you're getting to that point because the technology's caught up with it. But then, when the Henson Company did the original Fraggle Rock, and I don't know much about the current version, but the original Fraggle Rock was shot, I think, in 3 days. So they said, "Oh, well, we'll do Wubulous World of Dr. Seuss. That'll also be a 3 day show. It's a half hour. It's puppets. Same, we had five main puppeteers. Everything was budgeted like Fraggle Rock. But because of this technology, the first episode we shot, I think, was like 6 days. Then it was like 5 days. Eventually, we got it down to 4 days, but it was never a 3 day show. Now, if we shot with just a regular set and stuff, yeah, we probably could have cracked it down in 3 days, but it wouldn't look like the world of Dr. Seuss. And that was one of the reasons they did it. They didn't just do it because it would be faster and easier and cheaper. They did it because here's a way to build the world of Dr. Seuss that can't really be constructed physically. But I do know that, a second season when I was not working on it, they actually did build the Cat in the Hat's room home base as a physical set, so they could save a little bit of time by having an actual set to work on.
For me, there's a piece of me too, and I don't know if it's just my age group or what, but I like the tangible
Oh yeah,
backgrounds. I like
absolutely.
stuff that I love miniatures as an exterior. Like I even though I know it's not real, it pulls me in even more. It feels like I'm connected to it, and as a kid, I remember thinking, oh, I can do that. I'm inspired to do that. And I guess it's true with digital stuff too. There's certainly a generation of kids who are like, "Oh, I could probably make that on my home computer or the computer at the library or whatever." Um, but I'm I think I'm graduating to a level where I feel some real separation generationally, where I'm like the old timer on the porch freaking out about the horseless carriage.
Hmm.
What are you thinking?
No, I mean the AI stuff to me just seems so weird to make that where they're taking the stand on saving money, because you're not really paying a writer that much for a first draft
Yeah.
of a show.
Right. I also wonder how much of it too is just the thinking of what's going to grab the headline, what's going to grab the attention, what's the nifty new trick. I was going to say earlier, we use the stick analogy a lot in early childhood in classrooms. Kids love playing with sticks, and so often teachers will say, "Ah, put it down. You're going to poke your eye out." But there's also the other teachers that are like, "Hey, you found a stick. That's great. It's open ended. It can be anything you want it to be. You might get hurt. I'm here to guide you." But you've got the space to play with it. It's just a thing. It's just a tool. We decide how to use the tool, not the other way around. And I think that can be applied to any new fancy tool, immersive metaverse concept stuff, AI, layered reality. Um, but it seems to get more complicated where the tools start to whack you on their own without,
Well, and the tools are great. You
yeah,
know, the technology we had was great. It just was not a savings of money. When I was researching a lot about Jim Henson, he would always talk about using the technology, but to try and use it in the service of making his creations better. It wasn't just I'm going to use technology for technology's sake.
right.
It was like, how can we make this work with what we're doing?
Thank you for making a beautiful transition into your book. Well done. So, Sam and Friends: The Story of Jim Henson's First Television Show. Um, 1953, is that right? The first.
Well, he started working on television in 1954, and then in 1955 is when Sam and Friends came around.
And that wasn't that was Jim and Jane equally going into it.
Well, at very first, when Jim started out, he was working with a classmate of his named Russell Wall, and they were doing this show for WTOP in Washington, and that didn't last very long. So when he went over to Channel 4 to WRC, that's when he started working with Jane, because by then, he started in high school. He started then going to college. So it was the end of his high school career. He started out going to college, and that's where he met Jane in a puppetry class. And he needed someone to work with, and he liked what she was doing, so he invited her to join him.
And then at that same time, when was he learning about how to make a commercial and we were talking about the different pieces and how it all ends up feeding the work ultimately. From what I understand, that was a means to make the money to make the art. Is that true or
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, the earliest commercials they did were for this coffee company in Washington, Wilkins Coffee, and the coffee company sought them out because they had seen Sam and Friends. But up to that point, most of what Jim and Jane were doing were lip syncing to records, either comedy records like Stan Freberg or popular songs of the time. And they weren't really using voices very much. Jim, did an occasional thing, but not really that much. And then when they started doing the commercials, that's when Jim started using his voice and getting more comfortable doing it. And then that got brought into the Salmon Friends show, and all the characters started talking, and they augmented these lip sync performances with comedy sketches that Jim would write and then voice. And Jane did not voice things, generally speaking. I found a couple of recordings of her doing voices, but it was mostly Jim.
What about when Jim went to the UK for early Muppet stuff? I know you wrote about her essentially,
Yeah,
in many ways, saving the show.
she took over because the later on they would take a summer vacation, then the show would go on hiatus. But at that point, the TV station didn't want to take the show off the air. It was very popular. So they asked Jim to keep it going somehow, bring in someone else. And Jane couldn't do it by herself. They brought in a friend of Jim's from high school, Bob Payne. And Bob worked with Jane to keep the show going. And that during that period of time, because this was, they mostly used the, records, but it wasn't like Jim scripted out everything for them to do. Jane would just sort of take Jim's place as the creative visionary for the show for that period. So she would figure out what to do. And sometimes they would do a bit that Jim had done before, and sometimes they'd work out their own routine to another song. So Jane definitely was very talented and did a wonderful job keeping the show going, because it was when Jim came back from Europe, that's when he decided to keep doing this as an actual job. Up until then, it was, well, it's a part-time gig while I'm in college. I'll make a little money. And then they started making decent money doing commercials. And then they said, well, maybe there's something to be had, because it was in Europe where Jim started seeing other puppeteers. Because in America, puppetry was really a kid's thing. And in Europe, he saw that puppet theater had a very long history. And he said, well, this is something that can be taken seriously. And he came back and basically said to Jane, this is what's going to happen. We're going to keep doing this. We're going to make it a business. We're going to get married. And we're going to, and basically Jane's like, oh, okay, okay. You know,
And I recently learned about there, from what I understand, there was a bit of, no, I'm a cool kid. It's not like the association of little kiddie stuff, but like cutting edge, hip, late night TV approach.
yeah, the Muppets at that point, it was not really until Sesame Street that Jim started doing stuff expressly for children.
Mhm.
Because the audiences that he was playing to on Sam and Friends, it was either the evening news, it was going right into the NBC National News Report, the Huntley Brinkley Report, or going into the Tonight Show
Right.
at 11:25 at night. So nobody is watching. Kids are not watching that. And kids, the Muppets became popular with kids when they would do the Ed Sullivan Show and other primetime shows later on in the 60s. But at that point, it was a lot of kids in college and, young professionals, and people thought the Muppets were really cool because they were doing edgy, violent stuff, basically. The coffee commercials, the Wilkins coffee commercial is, do you drink Wilkins coffee? No. And then something bad happens. A character blows up or gets eaten or falls off of a plane. I mean, these are not kiddie things.
And especially at that time,
Yeah,
like this, would this be the pre, or would it be parallel to like Tom and Jerry cartoons? Or I guess
a
with
little
live
bit.
action, would we see that?
But yeah, I mean, this was a time. I mean, Howdy Doody was on the
Right.
air, and that was what was happening. Captain Kangaroo and Howdy
Yeah.
Doody. So Jim really didn't think about working for kids until much later on.
It seems like that's so much of what worked so well. I think the best artists, so often in children's media, we're put into these age groups. Like we just signed with Sensical TV, and they're like, no, you are 2 to 4 year olds right here. But I know for a fact there are retirement homes that like watching our series because it reminds them of when they were a kid. Anyone who's going through transition and you're speaking about social issues, you're going to be engaged with it. And I think back to the early shows. Kukla, Fran, and Ollie. It wasn't really a kid's
No,
show.
yeah, it was very sophisticated. They did operas. I mean, it was,
Yeah,
um,
read from the daily newspaper and
yeah,
spoke to the issues, right?
yeah. And I think that the reason I think a lot of companies like to do that
Mhm.
is because it helps them figure out how to sell it.
There it is again, huh?
Yeah. It's like, how do you sell? It's like, well, we can't go, if it's for everybody, who do we go to?
Right.
Who do we appeal to the advertisers? But if it's for kids, we can go to the toy companies and we can go to the kids' clothing companies and, other things that parents are going to have to buy.
Right.
You know, I think that it always comes down to that, sadly.
I don't know. I think so much about it seems to me anyway, from a lot of the people I've been talking to, we're on the another cusp of mass communication shift. Like there's always going to be radio, there's always going to be TV, there's always going to be movies, but now we're going from just looking at our screens to being immersed in these worlds. And it seems to me like it's going to start to get even more complicated, especially for young kids, to tell the difference between what's real and what's pretend, and then the manipulation that comes with that of I am your friend. Wouldn't you also like to have this yummy, delicious thing or buy this product? Like we've always had that, but it's pretty easy to spot. Like we play, is this a commercial with our kids? We look for those details and we can teach that critical thinking. But I feel like it's starting to get more challenging and more subtle. And I wonder how folks in children's media can kind of prep and media in general can prep young viewers to navigate that.
Well, I think that's, yeah, it's a toughie. And I think that you're very wise to say, and viewers in general, because it's a problem that's spreading across the board. You have a lot of, for lack of a better term, fake news.
Yes, good old propaganda.
Yeah, and there are things that are, being deep faked, and a lot of the viewership is not discerning or skeptical enough to, say, oh, gee, should I really be listening to this, or is this accurate?
You're making me think of my wife's grandmother is still with us, and we were visiting her over the holidays, and she's got this big old screen with preloaded apps that lead to stations. And what do you know? The free stations are often the Fox propaganda. And it is just like old school kids media. It is a big talking head who shows up every day consistently with routine and speaks like a friend and does subtle little manipulations.
Hmm.
If there was a Christmas episode with all the news broadcasters personalities who kept saying the phrase with a big smile, and remember, the nation's divided and we're going to play this game about why we're so divided, and just planting that subtle little idea. And you do hear that because it's conditioning. So it isn't just young kids, it's our elderly, it's us too.
Right, and we'll be right back after this commercial for gold that's really not worth as much as we should be telling you. And why do you have to buy gold? Because we're a divided nation and it could collapse at any minute. So you need something to spend. You
Right.
know, um, it's a very, very tough time. And I think in some ways, I think the kids are in a slightly better position because they're used to some of these fantasy worlds, and they know in their heart that that it's a fantasy world. And I think some of the adults out there are being told it's a fantasy world without regard to reality.
That's a reassuring point. It's true. I guess it's true for every generation too, with whatever the new technology is and how it's being used. It's the kids that are, if you're coming up in it, you'll adapt. One of my mentors, David Newell, who played Mr. McFeely on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood,
Speedy delivery.
amazing, such a wonderful human being. He said, it's not that kids today have changed; it's the world around them. But as human beings, we can adapt. So he always has that seed of hope. Um, but it's hard to not get concerned and think about the responsibility when you're a parent and a caregiver and someone talking through the screen. So as we're wrapping things up, what gives you hope when you're writing? I don't know if you're still working on projects, or what the next one is? I know that you're
Well,
the book and
yeah, I mean, I really loved doing the book because it made me think about how simple things were and how it all started. And, not just Jim's work, but television
yeah,
was so much simpler. And while, we have a lot of great stuff now, it's not as fun for me to work on the shows as it used to be. And I haven't stopped working in television entirely, but I'm not actively seeking out the projects like I used to. I did a streaming show for YouTube, series of holiday specials with Spookly the Square Pumpkin, who's been around for a long time in books and stuff. And that was a lot of fun because we were trying to return to, hey, we're going to put on a show.
yeah,
And we did sort of a variety show with pro social messaging, but we didn't have curriculum that was hitting you over the head. It's all, this is a square pumpkin in a round pumpkin world, but he fits into. And these are his friends that are all slightly misfits, but they all regard each other as family and work together, and they're going to put on a show for you. And things are going to go wrong, but you're going to have a good time. And that was a really fun project to work on. And I directed those episodes, and they're out there on YouTube. And then before that, I did 12 episodes of the most recent incarnation of Clifford the Big Red Dog. And that was a lot of fun too, because we didn't have too many curriculum things. We basically had like three things you had to get into an episode. The characters had to read, and there had to be a demonstration of empathy and that sort of thing. But it wasn't like some of the curriculum stuff that's being done in television where it stifles creativity,
right,
and you can't just have fun and do something that you believe is positive. You have to try and get to specific things that we know kids are just going to forget.
right,
And the thing is that worked long ago because when I was growing up, Sesame Street was on like 4 times a day. So you would see it over and over again, and there would be repetition, and that's how you learn. But now Sesame Street's a half hour
right,
once a day when it airs on PBS. So you're going out of your way to hit a really specific curriculum point that the kids are generally not going to remember because the repetition isn't there anymore. I see this, the one thing that I do on a regular basis still for kids, I write and direct live music concerts for a nonprofit organization here in New York called Little Orchestra Society. And Little Orchestra has been around for 75 years. And we do music concerts where we, have a different theme, different composer highlighted in each one. And we have a slight curriculum where we hit a biographical point, we hit a music theory point, we hit something about a musical instrument. But it's mostly about having fun and presenting classical music as an enjoyable experience, not just for the kids, but for the parents as well. So we're going to try and make them laugh and equate going to this concert as a fun experience. So later on, when they experience classical music in other serious situations, they'll, hey, I had a good time when I was a kid doing Little Orchestra.
right,
And, I don't remember what Allegro means, but I remember I had a good time.
right,
And that's, I really enjoy that because I enjoy it because it's live and I can see the kids react.
yeah,
And I know immediately if a joke is working or not working, and I can change it for the next show. I have to say that when it's being done with a real thought for what the kids are going to enjoy, I think that's when programming for kids gets really good.
absolutely,
And not when it's like what kids should learn.
right.
Yeah, they should learn and it should be good. But the first thing is, how are we going to make them have a good time and enjoy this program? And I think that's when I get very happy about doing it.
A big game changer for us was all the talking head predecessors would pretend to talk through the screen, and then the second we could actually talk through the screen, my wife and I got so excited. And now we do biweekly live streams into Baltimore City schools, and it's the best because I definitely early on would come in with, "Oh, I am the teacher. I'm going to dictate and lecture whatever lesson I want to teach," which is one approach. But it's much more interesting to be a guide and actually listen to what how do you think Teddy's feeling today? And the stuff that they share is never what you think it's going to be. Sometimes it's super funny and silly, but sometimes it is very, very serious. And then you in a way, in a good way, are forced to be in the moment and authentically be with them, and it becomes something different than just a show. So yeah, technology can be awfully good. Uh, uh, I'm excited that folks will have the chance to see you in person in Maryland pretty soon. Do you feel comfortable talking about that?
Yes, absolutely. It is a touring version of the permanent exhibit that we have at Museum of the Moving Radio, Museum of the Moving Image.
And it's starting from the early days of Sam and Friends and going Muppets, Sesame Street, Labyrinth.
Yep, Fraggle Rock, all of Jim's career. Yeah, and it's very significant because that's the whole area where Jim started it. And when Sam and Friends got its sponsor, it was the SK Meat Company of Baltimore. And so that's when Sam and Friends got on a network of two stations. It was on WBAL in Baltimore as well as WRC in DC.
Not too shabby. It's so reassuring for me and so many other people that are just getting going. I mean, we've been doing Treehouse for 15 years, but we're the point of like, no, we're doing this full time now. We're really going for it. It's so reassuring when you hear about your heroes, people like Jim Henson and Fred Rogers and Sherry Lewis and just countless of other people that just started real small. They were kid, and you just keep working towards it. And
Mhm.
the goal is not necessarily fame and fortune. Those are like side effects of just being passionate and being happy and making something that you care about.
Yeah, and I think that I grew up at a time where while we only had few channels, we had Mr. Rogers, we had Sesame Street, and I remember all the other shows that I grew up with. In New York, we had Carol and Paula, The Magic Garden, and it doesn't seem like we didn't have enough to watch because we augmented it with the reruns of Batman and Star Trek and things like that. But yeah, there's so much out there. Sometimes it's too much,
Yeah.
and it makes it hard to, like I said before, break through to have a breakout hit, and that makes it tough for everyone because that's where not to mention money, but that's where the money comes in. You got to sell the toys, and
Yeah.
although selling toys isn't as important as it was.
And I think there's also like a reconditioning that needs to happen too. Like I'm part of a club of modern day local kids show hosts. There's a guy named Stan Tucker from the Very Area Library and Science with Sophie and Lindsay Muir, and they all are really classic local kids show hosts. And we've all talked about how there's this thing over the past 10, 15 years of if you want to be successful, you have to have this giant follow, you have to have your followers and you have to have huge subscription numbers to measure your success before you can even go to the old-fashioned gatekeepers to say, can I step into the next level? But we've come to the conclusion of no, maybe we all just like serve our local audience and you can have joy out of that and sustain the work that way. It doesn't have to be,
Well, and you can address specific needs
yeah,
of that
right,
audience without having to be global. You can really talk about what's affecting that particular specific community.
right,
And I have to say, it's great to see people on screen
right,
because, once animation started becoming ubiquitous in children's television, it went from being unaffordable. So that's why you had, live action kid show hosts. And let's, it's like, what's the most affordable way we can make television? Well, we'll have live action hosts introduce existing cartoons that were made long ago.
right,
And that's, and then, okay, well, now we can make the cartoons in a way we can afford to do that for television. So let's get rid of the live action hosts.
right.
Sorry, Buffalo Bob, you're done.
Yeah.
Although I think Buffalo Bob was actually replaced by Sherry Lewis in his time slot. But anyway, and I love seeing the people. Mr. Rogers had an enormous influence on his audience because he was a real person.
Right. And not just an actor playing a part, although that's fine. There's nothing wrong with the Blues Clues approach of kid-like adults, but there's something to be said for an actual the same on and off screen, with variations,
Yeah,
and also having a human being looking at a tangible puppet that you project as the performer your humanity onto. It allows the person on the other side of the screen to do the same, and then it's this communication tool.
quick story. On the day Jim Henson died, I was working in the PR department at the Henson Company, and the phones were ringing off the hook. And we were just getting really frustrated. Everyone else in the company was up in our conference room, spending time together and talking. And we had to keep going. We were public relations. That was what we had to do. And the phones are, and I'm getting really, I pick up the phone. I was like, public relations. And this is what I hear on this. Hi, this is Fred Rogers from Pittsburgh. And at once I recognized the voice. Mr. Rogers. And my blood pressure came down. And he's like, I just wanted to ask you to tell Jane to give my condolences from me and everyone in the neighborhood.
Oh,
And I said, I'll tell her, Mr. Rogers, thank you so much. And, I never talked to the man again. I always wanted to reach out. But in that time, I became 4 years old again. And I heard that voice of calm,
right.
which helped me get centered and move forward with the rest of the awful day that was ahead. You don't get that. I love puppets, I love animation, but if a person can make contact and establish a relationship like that.
Right.
When I first visited the set of Sesame Street, and then when my wife started working there and I got to go a lot more, we'd spend time with these wonderful people: Bob McGrath, Emilio Delgado, Roscoe Orman, Loretta Long, and Sonia Manzano, all of these wonderful people. And I would feel this electricity in a way that I wouldn't feel when I saw the Muppets. Because, deep down, oh, there are like four of those Muppets and they're in a box. And, yeah, I love them and I love them being manipulated. But, there's only one Bob. And when Bob starts having a conversation with you, it's so special. And these people, they're wonderful, warm people who have, sacrifice is not really a word, but to use, but it is kind of a sacrifice that they've given up, because a lot of them missed out on other acting opportunities because of their connection to Sesame Street. Either they were not really allowed to take the jobs if there were certain things, Roscoe had to quit a gig on All My Children because he was playing Tyrone the Killer Pimp.
Right.
um, they are, all of them, so proud of the work that they did on Sesame Street and of the relationships. And, if I'm walking around with one of them, you could see tears well up in people's eyes as they're meeting them. Bob came to my book signing in September, and it was like I was standing next to one of the Beatles. People would swarm him and give him this adulation.
Yeah.
And I think Bob enjoyed it just as much as they did, because he's getting to see all of these kids that he talked to and interacted with through television all those years. And now they're grown up and they're telling him how much he meant to them. And it's a magical relationship. And, Bob was just so wonderful. I remember he came to the book signing, and then after, he came over and I wanted to give him a book. He said, No, I already pre-ordered mine. And he came just to support me, and for a guy who was 90 years old, it's not an easy schlep to come in from Jersey to Astoria, Queens. But it meant so much. And he did the same thing when my wife Stephanie had her first concert at Birdland Club. And I came in and said, Oh, Bob's out there. And she started crying because when she was like 3 or 4 years old, she went to see Bob perform at the concert and he gave in Pittsburgh, where she grew up. And it's like I went to see Bob, and now he's coming to see me, and it's just an amazing thing. And I think I'd love to see more of that on television, but you can't sell a doll of the humans, or at least not really. It all comes down into what's going to be marketable. But I love that you're doing this.
There are there's so many, and there's like the national ones, like the trifecta of Blues Clues guys. They're good human beings. They're good guys, and they're
Yeah,
kid like they're playing a part, but they're them. There's that level, and then there's like the clowns, like the Pinky Lees of the world to modern day Blippi, like there's that type of thing. But then there are uh, real life teachers, um, almost like romper room style. With Miss Rachel is a new personality. Is not even right. She's an actual speech therapist who's become very popular, just talking through the screen and using the same sort of high pitched voice that Blippi does, but not for the sake of stimulation, but for the sake of teaching kids how to um, communicate and engage. Uh, so there are those human voices, but again, it's um, yeah, I think it's such a big. There's so much in the sea right now. It's this Red Sea. YouTube is always compared to a Red Sea, and if you want to clear out all of the bloody waters from the
yeah.
sharks, just focus in your little ponds, and you really do. Even if Betty Aberlin, I got to write back and forth with her for a little bit, and she said two things. She wrote two things. She said it's exceedingly more important to be the first you instead of the next someone else. Just be you. Don't be inspired by others, but be you. That's enough. And also, even if the only person that shows up to your show is you, that's enough too. You still have to show up and be totally authentic. Yeah, humanity is not lost in this day and age. I don't think it's just maybe it's a little hard to see from time to time, but
Well, yeah, and I think it just doesn't fit in with what the corporate minds are trying to do in terms of marketing
yeah,
a show. And I think that's the tough
yeah.
part.
Well, yeah, I guess Craig, we'll just see what happens next.
But I think what's wonderful is that you have, and the hosts that are working with you have an advantage over what when Jim Henson was starting out, because you can do a show. You don't need to talk your way into a job at a local TV
Yes,
station. You can do it from your
yeah,
house. All of us can broadcast, and it's one of my favorite movies, or one of my favorite directors, Billy Wilder, made a movie called Kiss Me Stupid. And it's not his best movie, but it's a lot of fun. And Dean Martin is in it playing a version of himself. And at the end, he had this line. The whole thing involves these two songwriters trying to get discovered, and what they'll go to, what the lengths they'll go to. But at the end, Dean Martin's character says, well, if you got what it takes, sooner or later, someone's going to take what you got.
oh, that's good. My Bob quote. I back when I was teaching preschool full time, I went to a NACI conference and Bob was there singing to all the teachers and singing the "Your face, your face, no one has your face," and all these adults were just bawling and singing, just so connected. And I waited and waited and waited afterwards until he was walking out and offered to help him carry his stuff. And I knew I wanted to get into kids media, but I didn't know how and I didn't know what to do. So I'm asking him these questions and he's being super patient and very that Bob, TV Bob. And then he was also he took a moment and shifted a little bit from I'm going to talk to little Danny Joe, kid you, and now I'm going to talk to adult you. And he was like, "Look, kid, you just have to do the work." And it was like, that's it. I mean, that's really it, you know?
Well, yeah, and people don't realize that when Bob got to Sesame Street, he had already had this big career.
Babu Babu.
He was in his mid 40s,
Yeah.
yeah, and he had toured Japan, and he had been on Mitch Miller. And, I don't think at any time that he thought saw 40 years ahead on this TV show, that he would still be talking to Big Bird. He's such a beautiful man, and all of those cast members are just really wonderful.
Mhm.
Uh, and I think it's great that Sesame Street is continuing, but I think they lost a little bit of the magic when those human cast members were when it became less reliant. The show, it's still an impressive feat to have the show going on.
And there's certainly a new, I don't know if new is the right word, but there's a current cast of live action caregivers.
Yeah, but just not as many. They have like two or three human characters. I mean, four.
My a friend of mine in Baltimore who's a civil rights activist here, she was really sad when Sesame Street became gentrified. Like it was such a big,
Oh yeah.
it's a different street now. It's still a really welcoming, lovely, loving street.
Oh yeah. But I think the thing is that now it's a show, and when we grew up watching it, it was a place.
Yes.
And I think that's, to me, and I don't want to say anything bad about it being a show. There's nothing wrong with being a show,
Right.
but it was a place that you visited every day.
Yes. Yeah, it's real. It was real. Rogers talked about that. I don't have a show, I have a program.
Yeah,
You're coming into my
it's a television visit.
right. It's real. That's the thing that's important. Again, going back to telling the difference between what's real and pretend, I think that's one of the things that's gonna be so key. Like really showing what authentic human beings are, earnestly, not holding anything back, so that when the AI generated version of
Hmm.
me and you is saying some other thing that's not quite right, a savvy kid will be able to go, "Oh, that's not human. That's
Yeah,
tricky," you know?
yeah, and I think the whole thing with Sesame Street is that they just don't have the same amount of real estate as they did. To the reason they could accommodate that huge human cast of characters
Uh-huh.
was that they had 130 shows that were an hour long, and now they do like 26 shows that are less than a half hour. So they just don't have, and so they have great people like Alan Maroka, wonderful person. He plays Alan in the tradition of Bob playing Bob, and Alan is sort of he's the senior member of that human cast, and he's amazing. And it's just it's sad that they don't have the ability to have this sort of deep bench, to use a baseball metaphor, because and I think they've also just really brought in a lot more Muppets, and that's great too.
Yeah, things evolve over time and they adapt and they change, and that's normal and that's okay. And I think it's clear to anyone listening to this that we both obviously really very much respect Sesame Street and shows like Mr. Rogers and their
Absolutely.
present day counterparts. It's just a little bit different is all. That's all. Not good or bad. It's just
Yeah, and I don't want to be, I'm not the guy saying, "Oh, back when I was around, it was really great."
I tend to be that guy. I lean into that guy a lot.
Yeah, but sometimes it wasn't always that great. I remember watching, they put out a bunch of DVDs of Howdy Doody shows, and Stephanie and I were watching Howdy Doody, and there's a lot of fun, silly stuff. But and then okay, now we're finishing our sketch, and now Buffalo Bob, I'm going to turn to camera and tell you all about Hostess cupcakes. And I'm going to tell you how Wonder Bread builds bodies 10 different ways, or however many different ways. There was no gap between the program and the commercial. And you knew that you were watching a show that was really on the air
Right.
to sell stuff. But it was effective from beyond the grave. Where Buffalo Bob was telling us about Hostess cupcakes, and what we went out and did. We went out and bought Hostess cupcakes right after we watched that DVD, and he was right; they were great. But then as we got a little older, in the era that we were watching children's television, you had the separation. You had rules, and I don't even know if that Children's Television Act is still in place.
Well, I've been researching this for a paper for EdSurge for a while. So 1973, that's where ACT came through.
Right.
Friends on the screen can't hold up a box of cereal and
Right.
say, "Hey kids, Miss
Yeah.
Ding Dong School's Miss Francis can't say, 'Kick cereal sure is good. Remember to ask
And you
mommy.'"
can't have GI Joe commercials inside of a
Yeah,
GI Joe show.
but everybody sidestepped it. Everybody
Yeah.
found a way around it. And now even with COPPA, which is like the present day variation of that same rules and regulations for YouTube, there are so many influencers that are still selling stuff blatantly.
Hmm.
And worse, the thing that I get really passionate and upset about, um, Rogers used to talk a lot about how we back in the 60s were conditioning kids to become consumers at younger and younger ages. Now we've gone all the way to kids are the things we're consuming as products. Children are brands. They're
Hmm.
kid influencers before they even have the ability to make a choice of whether or not they want to be filmed in play. That play is
Hmm.
monetized and animated, and you refer to your child as a character. And there's a system in place for that to be a successful
Yeah.
road to wealth. And if there's choice involved, fine. But for young children developmentally, being able to see that far ahead of what that means for them, it's very questionable. Um, but the same rules, the Kuhn's law does not apply to social media.
Right.
Like there's no way. It's different from state to state, and it's so easy to sidestep it because there's so, going back to what you were talking about, there's so much stuff. It's
Yeah.
hard to keep track of it in the way that it's presented. Um, we just did an episode for Danny Joe's Treehouse about commercials because I hate it when commercials interrupt. So we made an episode where we push back and point out what a commercial is. And it's the eras of a 1950s commercial to a 1960s Big Eyes and
Right.
high pitched voice to the G.I. Joe like commercial, E-Man commercials, to the influencer. Hey fam, it's your boy, whatever, it's the same beats and language. I'm your friend. I'm with you. Here's the product. Um, yeah, history repeats itself.
But there was a time where, you had to have, after these messages, we'll be right back,
Right.
and there was a marcation line. Um, now you sneak it in as an unboxing video
Yeah.
with the fine print is so and so has supplied this product.
Yeah.
You know,
Or you don't even have to do that. It's so
yeah,
subliminal, you'll know that whomever is watching that will feel connected with their virtual friend and want to have the same sort of thing. You don't even have to hold it up. This is where I start to sound like the angry old guy screaming at the horseless carriage. It is what it is, but we're aware of it, which is
yeah,
good.
and there is a reality where the bills have to be paid, and
Sure.
and the money has to come from somewhere, and I'm aware of that.
Yeah.
But you got to do it in a way where you're still protecting the viewer
Yes.
from themselves, basically.
Right.
I remember watching tons of commercials when I was a kid and seeing all the great GI Joe Adventure Team vehicles,
Yeah.
all of the stuff that I wanted, but no one was selling it to me. I didn't have Buffalo Bob telling me to go out and buy it,
Right.
and it's going to make your life great.
And then there were also the people that were like, "Oh, what if we took that structure of commercials and we'll put it into a kids show and we'll call it Sesame Street?"
Exactly. Yeah.
Like people who, or Jim saying, "Well, maybe this is the frame of the puppet theater. Maybe, maybe we kind of make fun of the product."
Yeah. And sell me the alphabet. That's a product I want to buy.
You know what? I think I'll buy that too, Craig. Yeah, I think it's about what you're selling and remembering who you're serving. What a great conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I learned a lot. I really did. Craig and I would love to see you at the Maryland Center for History and Culture. It's going to be amazing. We're going to celebrate the legacy of Jim Henson, and you are invited. Learn more at mdhistory.org. And we'll see you next time on Cookies for Breakfast.